Let's get some game physics up and running in our world. Some of you have been struggling to figure out what exactly you need to do to make sure that physics works in the first place. And by physics, I mean that things are able to interact. For example, that this car might be able to sit on top of something, and also that gravity works, and that we have forces at play so that things can interact with one another. We'll get to some of those other things in a little bit, but first of all, I have this car here, and I need something for it to sit upon. Right now, there's this endless void of nothingness beneath it that it's going to fall into eternally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new 3D object of a plane. And what this plane is just kind of a flat, thin piece of ground. And it looks like it created it a little bit low here. Notice that its position on the right. I'm just going to reset this to 0, 0, 0. And that's going to place it nicely under this vehicle. And I think that's a little bit small if I want to move this vehicle around later. So I'm also going to select this plane and scale it. I'm going to make it 10 by 10. And now notice something. This 10 didn't change anything. Why is that? Our y-axis is up and down, and the plane is supposed to be flat. So I actually can't even adjust the y. But I'll make the z 10. And now I have something for the car to sit upon. I'm going to bring it a little bit lower, although I want it to be up just above the ground so I can show you something in a moment's time. Notice that this plane that I have selected, either by clicking on it in the hierarchy or in the scene view, it has a mesh collider. A collider means it has the rules for how Unity determines if something can bump into it or collide with it. And if we want things to be able to interact physically, they need to have a collider. And there's different types of colliders for different types of objects, but for the most part, many of the objects that you'll be using should have a particular type. When I click on my car, I notice it actually didn't come with a collider. It had a mesh renderer, which we won't worry about too much for now. It's about things like textures and materials, but it doesn't actually have a collider. So I'm actually going to add a box collider. And a box means that it gets this rectangular collider. And hopefully you just saw it. The green outlined box here is the collider. And I want us to take a look at something down by the wheels here. The collider that Unity automatically created, it doesn't actually go all the way to the bottom of the wheels, which is interesting. And let's see what effect that is going to happen here. If I hit play to run my game, I'm going to see that nothing happens. The car is still floating above the ground. In fact, something I'm going to do, and quick side note, if I ever want to get close up to a certain object, if I double click on it, it's going to kind of highlight it for me and bring my attention closely to it. This camera, I'm going to bring it down just a little bit more so I can clearly see that space underneath the vehicle. There. I can see that it's hovering. So the vehicle has collision, but it doesn't have physics yet. Why not? Well, my car needs to have something called a rigid body. Don't make the mistake of clicking on Rigid Body 2D. If you ever make 2D games in the future, you might want to use that. But a rigid body is meant for 3D development, and when I add it, I notice I get some settings: mass, drag, angular drag, and use gravity. Mass is something that we may want to change later when we have things running into one another. But for now, we're going to leave everything as it's set out of the box, making sure that use gravity is enabled. Now, when I press play, I should see that this car actually falls. Well, gravity's tugging it downwards. But notice, it looks like it's sunk into the ground a little bit. Why has it sunk? Well, let's think back to what we saw about its actual collider. The collider doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the wheels. It's actually this exact line right here where the car sank into the ground. And I want this to look a bit more realistic. So what can I do about that? Well, under the collider, if I make sure it's opened up, I have this Edit Collider option. When I click on it, I'm suddenly able to actually manipulate and work with these collider properties themselves and change some information about them. And notice that I can kind of pull and drag this collider outwards. I can pull this part of the collider outwards here. And if I look at the bottom and see this dot, I can tug this collider down. And I'm just going to be as precise as I can really quickly here and get it right to the bottom of the wheel. Looks pretty good. And then turn off editing. And look at that, the collider seems much more accurate to the bottom of the tires. When I press run, it sits beautifully, mimicking reality. Now I have a vehicle on this plane. Maybe I can do some more with it in the next video.